It is, whoa, how do you condense this to a definition?
Anything that you can bring in can be utilized as a tool as long as it's, productive for learning.
My perception of educational technology is instructional technology, and in that I mean the tools and the process.
Okay, so I come from a very clear early childhood developmentalist background. So when I think of technology in an early childhood classroom, it could be something as simple as a slant board in a classroom.
Technology can be a big umbrella. You could look at it as you use the chalkboard as a form of technology to enhance or add to what you're verbally presenting.
Like back when I started, it was film strip and movie, right?
A seating arrangement, it could have to do with the materials and the environment. So it doesn't necessarily have to be your iconic, stereotypical computer, iPad, those obvious choices. So I think of technology much more broadly in terms of materials that may assist or enhance the learning process in the classroom.
And now how do we use computers? I think that's what we think of. Internet, any other multimedia software, to improve learning.
And then, of course, we have other options in terms of the whiteboard, in terms of our use of the online venues. So I would look at it as a broad umbrella to choose from.
I think we have to be careful with technology, right? Because it's certainly, I don't view it as a magic bullet. And I think a lot of school districts, especially here on Long Island, have jumped to that assumption that this is it, this is our ticket, let's get on board. I've seen a number of school districts adopt tablet learning and are buying hundreds of tablets, of course without training teachers and adding necessary supports. For many students it does work, and you had mentioned earlier the younger students today, they're growing up in the 21st century with great ease with technology, right? From an early childhood perspective though, whatever materials you bring into the class, we have to look at the developmentally appropriateness of them. So it bothers less to me that it's technology, so to speak, but more any material. I want to see how is it being used by the teacher. Is it appropriate for that grade level for that child? Whether it's a pencil and paper task or a computer-based learning assignment.
I think we have to be very, very careful about how young we introduce it, because if they're using technology, what aren't they doing? And I am a huge advocate of sensorial, experiential learning, naturalistic learning, getting kids outside. My preferred technology for a kid, and I can't give you up to what age, but for an extended period, is a magnifying glass, a pair of binoculars, get them outside in their schoolyard instead of sitting at the desk. And again, I don't want to be long-winded, but I can't give you an exact age, but I think we have to be really, really careful, especially because outside of school, kids are spending more time sitting passively in front of the screen. We know the stats, 6.5 hours of television a day. I don't even know how that's mathematically possible. An inordinate amount of time multitasking. So if we don't give them the safe space to play and use other technology, ancient technology, basic technology, in the school setting, I am becoming increasingly concerned.
I think that we have to be cautious. I think it's a wonderful resource, and I think it excites kids and it intrigues kids, and it makes learning more exciting very often and more interactive, and I think we need to use it in that way. I guess I would differ in terms of looking, from my perspective as a clinician, looking at individuals with special needs a little differently. And I also work a lot with the early intervention population, so I work with young kids. And this argument comes up a lot with parents and other professionals in terms of what's too young and what kinds of things do we have to be concerned about. So for example, if I'm working with a very young child and my objective is to get them to speak more because they're speech delayed or language delayed, and I see a child who locks into the iPad and just sits there and is totally silent because they're really in effect zoned out, and I'm certainly not going to get any speech, that concerns me. And I see a lot of young kids who are totally drawn like a magnet to their parents' iPhones and iPads, and it's difficult to get it away from them, and parents use it as a virtual babysitter, which of course, you understand, we used to use different things, but I think there's a real danger. And I think there's been enough talk about it. Like I know I talked to my class about the fact that the American Academy of Pediatrics has come out repeatedly and said that kids under 2 shouldn't have any screen time at all. That's pretty drastic, but they say that.
I agree with them that prior to the age of 2 to 3, technology should not be introduced, but rather brought in later.
They say no screen time, which includes TV, iPads, computers. And then they say it needs to be very limited.
One of the points that they make that I really try to make with my students also is people tend to get caught up with screen time and the amount of time. And the American Pediatrics will say from age 3 to 5, children should not be exposed to more than 30 minutes of screen time.
That the brain is not wired to learn that way when kids are young. They've done studies where they see that kids learn more from human face-to-face contact than even from a human face on a TV monitor. So we have evidence to tell us how kids learn. And there's, I think, some concern that if they're exposed to too much technology too young, it's going to change the way they learn, and maybe not for the better. Are we creating a generation of kids with ADHD?
I want to de-emphasize screen time and really look at more the use. How are we using the technology? We want to be careful that it's not passive learning and passive instruction, so that's definitely a critical piece that we have to look at. And again, if we can integrate it very naturally into the learning process and consider it more as a tool for learning, I think, we'll do better and be able to move forward.
I think there's tremendous potential to personalize and differentiate learning. For example, I supervise student teachers at Mineola where they use the iPads a lot. And our student teachers took advantage of that opportunity to differentiate the pieces that the students weren't reading by their reading levels. So they took the time to upload material about weather that was at their reading level, but they were all reading about the same concepts. So I think there's tremendous opportunity to do a better job of student-centered learning and then let them make choices. Obviously we know that motivates. And if we put the back time in to using the technology to do that. But again, if we just give them iPads and go on Google Earth, isn't that great? I'd be like, why did you do that? We always have to answer, why are we doing that?
It's interesting because if we look at it from more of a high school perspective versus an early childhood perspective, I do see some exciting things happening more in the adolescent realm in classroom learning. Let's say if you take a traditional didactic approach, a teacher who teaches an upper level AP course that's very content driven, I've seen teachers like that bring in video clips, Safari montage. I don't know if you're familiar with it. I've seen tablet technology in classrooms at the high school level where students can readily look at primary source documents, compilation of video clips, letters, and that can really change the learning process. I see them working in small group instructions. I see a different atmosphere than I would have 5 or 10 years ago in a content-driven high school level course. So I think that that's really cool in a primary and early learning classroom. I still hope that I'm going to see kids around a sand and a water table, and I want to see them using imagination skills, exploration. I want to see hands-on learning. Can technology be a part of that? Surely. Should it be? Absolutely. Should it be the sole focus? Certainly not.
We have to be very careful that we act like, oh, we have technology, so now learning is engaging. So I don't know that we're too dependent, but again, I'm going to go back to the process. And if we're using it to have kids collaborate, to have kids be creative, to have kids learn in a visually and auditory stimulating way, to extend the classroom beyond the 6 hours when they're at school, all those questions. So I think there's a tendency to think, oh, we have Brain Pop, we have PowerPoint, we have a lot of technology. How are you using it? Where's the interaction with the students? You use a smartboard. I think we're becoming over dependent on that because teachers say, oh, I'm going to use a smartboard. And one kid is up at the smartboard and the other 27 students are tuning out. So it's nothing ever is a solution. It provides opportunities, but it provides challenges. And I think we're too dependent on using technology as a passive medium when it shouldn't be. It should be maximized for the interactive capabilities it affords.
It depends on the learner. So, some students, some learners, they like different things. And, some prefer to work with their hands with, crayons and papers and pencils and, just physical type building materials. And there are others who prefer, varied computer environments, from a laptop to an iPad to going out into the field with, different surveying or measuring devices. So I think, I think it just, again, it depends on the student, and how they learn and the ways they learn, and also what motivates them and engages them, from using a particular tool.
It's part of their contextual learning. That's what surrounds them. So certainly it has to be incorporated, but I think just as readily as any other classroom material would be. And again, that really falls back to the responsibility of the professional educator who is setting up that learning environment. It has to be conducive to learning for all. So just as you might, for one child, have preferential seating, maybe another child can use a tablet, to help them maybe, have their ideas brought to the teacher's attention. So certainly it should be incorporated in.
Instructional technology, educational technology, tools, and process should alter the way, in my opinion, not the way information is presented, because I don't define that as what a teacher does. Too many teachers do, I think, but it affords the teacher opportunity to facilitate student-centered, engaging, meaningful learning. And I don't mean to just use a whole series of positive adjectives, right? But it has potential to alter it if it's used well. But if it's being used solely to present and the student remains passive and not actively engaged, motivated, tuned into their own learning, then don't use it. Don't use anything that does that.
My graduate students do learning style profiles, or like a learning inventory, so they can, I have them first make an assumption as to what type of learner they are, and then I actually give them a pencil and paper task and to, determine what their natural style is. And I do think technology has helped in that, but I'm hesitating, because I still think a teacher's knowledge and professional judgment, a strong teacher, they can pick that up within the first 3 weeks of a classroom, and they can tell. And a good teacher will generally differentiate and present materials in different ways to see that pop in a student's eyes, and to be able to detail how a student will become engaged. As a teacher educator, that's one of the things I always look for in a dynamic of a classroom, is how can we measure engagement? What does that look like? And you can be duped easily with technology, because you can have students really focused on a computer screen, but does that mean that they're engaged in the learning process? Not sure. So you've got to look a little bit deeper.
The question, the million-dollar question, right?
Either way it goes, I definitely think the pedagogy should be, very important and wrapped into anything we do with technology.
I certainly think that the thrust is not coming from technology, but more it has to come from pedagogy, solid, sound understanding of child development, child learning, child, difference amongst learners. The pedagogy has to come first, and then the technology is rather an enhancement to the learning. But I don't see that as what's pushing. I definitely see it as coming from a practitioner standpoint, from the teaching, from lesson design, from instructional purpose, intentional teaching. And an intentional teacher will know what choices to make and what materials to bring in.
When I was in school, we were always taught that the design should drive everything. And as I've walked through my career over all of these years, I also I started to transition in that area too. I believe that the world of technical innovation does tend to be moving quickly, and there's a new product on the market pretty much every day. And I think to keep up with these technologies and look at them and then in reverse say, how can this fit with the pedagogical side of things, I think is a good way to look at it, because sometimes we don't know what we need until we go out there and we shop for a solution. So I would have to say that it works in combination. So you should always have a goal in mind, where you want to go pedagogically, and then you go out there and you kind of look at what tools are available. Or someone may approach you with a tool and you say, wow, how I could apply this in the classroom.
I think that depends on where you're looking. I think where you have a situation where a district decides they're going to buy 200 iPads and pass them out, that's the technology influencing the pedagogy.
How do you feel about that kind of example? Do you like?
I think it's a real danger. So that's just, passing them out and not giving, without any rhyme or reason, and no individualization and no thought to what are you going to do with the iPad, or what are you going to load on the iPad, or how are you going to integrate it in your lesson. It's just like here, so I'm very concerned about that. And even in some cases, kids with disabilities where there has to be a decision where a district's going to fund a communication device. In many cases, even though the child's gone through an evaluation process, and we actually have a communication lab in the building here where I do evaluations to decide what device is appropriate, sometimes districts will actually challenge a decision that's been made based on a thorough evaluation and recommendation and say, why can't they have an iPad? Because that's the popular thing, because it's readily available, less expensive than a dedicated device that costs a lot more to manufacture. And so it's that, easy fix, not really fitting it to the needs of the child or the individual that really is troubling to many of us in the field. We can't get into that kind of generalization.
I think it works both ways, but I think primarily pedagogy, our understanding of what works best with a child, and then of course a classroom of learners, should be pedagogically and philosophically driven. That's the direction you take. What does this student need? What do our students need? How can I connect with them? How can I get them to connect with the content? How can I get their content into electronic containers, because that's our world, it's our digital world. But ooh, not like, ooh, let's use this. Why are you using that app? Why are you having them do that? So I would hope that what's driving it is a philosophy of ed that's based around students' needs, that drives the pedagogy, that drives the use of technology. There's potential there, there's huge opportunity, but what are you doing it? Why?
I think, as everything we've discussed here, you have to really make sure that there's a balance And for sure, it's enhanced teaching immeasurably. I think it makes it more interesting in many ways, more interactive, more exciting, if used properly and balanced out with other forms of instruction and activities. So I think that's the challenge we have as educators, is to keep the balance, keep the participation and the interest and the ability of students to contribute in terms of verbal and not just, a online or passive response. So I think it's all about the balance. I think it's a wonderful thing, and I know that it's added to my teaching, but I think we have to keep it in perspective.
I think just from my experience, I don't particularly see major risks. But again, I also believe in bringing a balance into everything. So I think if a child sits and plays video games for 18 hours a day and is missing out on food and fresh air and sleep, I think that can be a problem. But again, as adults, as teachers, our responsibility when introducing technology to children should be to teach them also how to moderate their use and use it appropriately.
We need to tend to social and emotional needs, and we need to all, I don't know the research on whether or not this exasperates attention deficit. In some ways, I'm sure it helps if the kids have creative outlets to use their talents and gifts. I don't know. It can't not spill over, and I think that, again, that's one of the reasons that I think unplugging at school, having a sacred space, if you will, to, again, curl up with a book, just smell it. Maybe it's musty, maybe there's, touch the book. And maybe that's just because I'm, 50 years old. I don't know, but I think the experience of it is different, Maybe it's not. Maybe I'm wrong in terms of what we know about cognition. But if we don't keep ourselves immersed in sensorial experiences, and I know, you're touching, but that's like when the kids say, I have kinesthetic learning, they're touching a smartboard. That is not kinesthetic learning.
One of the concerns I have, and I have done minimal research in this area, but it's something that I'm certainly concerned about, would be the next cohort of teachers. So I'm always concerned with novice teachers who come out into schools and lack training, support, and understanding in child development, learning, and it's a very difficult time right now in education. Teachers are really being critiqued, and they're put under a microscope. So I think that many novice teachers sometimes have to be careful, because when they get a job in a public school district, there's tremendous pressure and there's so much accountability around them that they may be given technology with certain requirements and also assumptions that they have to integrate it, but perhaps they lack, and no fault of their own, but they lack professional training in that regard, and that could really hamper learning and instruction in the classroom if it's not, again, thought out, planned, with intention behind it. So we're absolutely at risk in that regard, and nowhere more so than I think in novice teaching.